Morning. This morning we're talking about the financialization of nature, and I wanted to put on the table for consideration the commons as a strategy, potentially transformative strategy, as part of our ability to address that and to divert our path from going down that financialization path and toward a more transformative and hopeful strategy. So as everyone here is aware, we're living at a time, a real pivotal moment of a lot of breakdown, and that breakdown has a number of different faces. In particular, the ecological breakdown and the signs of distress we can see ecologically in climate change and species extinction are, abundantly clear. There's also the parallel economic crisis we're facing around the world, and again, many signs of that distress. But I want to lift up two aspects of that feel particularly important for today's presentation and for the conversation about the financialization of nature. And those two aspects are, first, the accelerating and, I think, radical dispossession of the many by the few. And we can see that again in a variety of different strategies, from the austerity programs and public cuts we're seeing really globally, that really break the prosperity sharing agreements that have been crafted over the last century and have given us a middle class or some degree of stability in many parts of the world. Other faces of that radical dispossession are the outright appropriation of natural and other resources. We can see, again, whether that's water, land, our seeds, and so on. And then there's, of course, now an emerging set of much subtler strategies for dispossession, like the financialization and other neoliberal schemes that enable again, a few to control and appropriate the benefit of the natural world for private gain. Parallel to that, and very much interconnected with it, is the rise of anti-democratic forces that really seek to limit people's ability to exercise power and determine resource use in everywhere from local communities all the way up to questions of global resources, for instance, the Arctic and our oceans and so on. And again, that takes many forms from legal changes that disenfranchise people to laws that favor corporate interests at both local, regional, national, and international levels. And then, of course, in some places in the world, out-and-out repression in terms of popular movements that are attempting to assert some kind of control or claim on resources in their communities. So while all of that's happening, of course, there's also some hopeful developments that are emergent, and it's exciting. Again, the popular movements we see on the rise in some really interesting and new ways. There are economic alternatives also on the rise, people rethinking the growth model and looking more at sustainable and solidarity economy models. But it's very unclear, of course, what will emerge out of all that, and we're living, again, just in a point of so much turmoil. And I think the thing to pay attention to here is that in a world so patterned on profit and private interests, the market paradigm is often seen as the most natural or normal approach to any social problem, and it has tremendous power to shape our thinking and even what is thinkable. And we need a real disruption in that pattern in order to break out of it. And several conversations that I've been in recently, we've looked at the question of whether we'll see any options to our dispossession. Will we see any avenue to stop that loss? Or maybe even more fundamentally, will we even see our dispossession as it becomes more and more subtle, and our loss of control of resources and even access to resources is not always visible to us until very far down the pike. I want to talk particularly this morning about water and who will shape the future of water. Clearly, this is one of the arenas in which these questions will play out really significantly, and it has, I guess, an interesting potential for really raising these questions, because water has eluded private ownership in ways more so than other kinds of shared resources, minerals or land. That water is something that everyone depends on, any living being depends on. We all know that, and at some very deep level, I think we understand that it can't be just for a few, and we can see that around water struggles around the world where people are trying to retain their ability to have sufficient water to survive. So we can see now that that there's an emerging struggle around water and water privatization, and just as an example of how that debate is shaping up, I went on the web and looked around a little, and here's a sample quote from a website. It's from the Fidelity Investment website, but it could really be from any number of different large investment firm websites. It says, because global water consumption is expected to increase by 40% over the next 20 years, the results could have massive economic, ecological, and geopolitical consequences. I just want to pause there. We'd all agree with that, and I think many of us would look at that and say, wow, this is a looming global crisis. We need to make sure that people have enough water to survive. What are the implications and solutions that this would suggest? I think, sadly, where Fidelity goes with this, and I think a lot of the sort of global investing market goes, is they see that this is an investing opportunity and that there's money to be made on this scarcity, and of course that would presume that they could control access or availability of that water or play some role in that. And that's where that path takes us as we privatize nature, is that those things we need for survival then become investment opportunities and require, in order to be successful investment opportunities, a degree of private control of those resources. And so what questions does that raise for us, I think, and what other approach might we stake out in terms of thinking about the future? And we certainly can fight the instances of abuse around water or any natural resource. We can stop one bad misuse or abuse of that water. But unless we can really get at this sort of fundamental set of assumptions that drive how we are in relationship to water, we are going to end up at a very transactional level of changing this law or that law. And we really need a systems change level that challenges the fundamental assumptions and allows for the dispossession. So I want to put on the table the commons, and this is a very simple framework. Many people are familiar with it. It's very much on the rise right now in terms of our, looking at down the future. And the basic definition of the commons is something that we all share, that we must take care of and pass on undiminished to future generations. It's a long-standing approach to resource stewardship and governance that grows out of indigenous and communal societies that took care of shared resources over many centuries and took care of them in a way that provided for equitable benefit and sustained use. And that's very much on the rise. You can think of something like a very digital reality like Wikipedia, collective resources that is collectively managed and governed, to a number of the take back the land and food sovereignty movements, efforts to preserve biodiversity as in the public realm as opposed to privatized, patented realm. So that's really an important historical root for this, and it has importance for us now because it really helps us articulate a base of our collective claim on those resources that are in danger of being privatized. This is a model that just looks at why the commons is a system shift. It's a different operating system in terms of how it thinks than a market paradigm. And at its center is a commitment to equitable benefit, ecological sustainability, and a recognition of interdependence, both our own on the resources that we share and obviously with those other people that we need to share them with. And so at the heart of the commons are those kinds of principles. It is rooted in those core kinds of values, and then out from that grows a system of a different sense of belonging, a different sense of stewardship that's shared, and a sense of governance in which the people that are dependent on the resources actually have some say. So let's go back a slide. So there's a set of beliefs that drive commons that are quite different, and that gives rise to this claim of something that is ours, that's our shared a shared resource, and one that then comes with a responsibility to engage in stewardship practices that enable us to take care of and share that well. And then lastly, that shapes a form of governance that in which people actually have a say and have power in being able to protect and allocate and enforce protective rules around that. So I want to take that into a specific example of an arena in which we're working, the Great Lakes in North America. They're a large, vast body of water. It's about 95% of North America's fresh water. About 34 million people depend on the Great Lakes for their fresh water. And currently its governance is failing, and it's failing in a variety of ways. It's failing to protect the water itself. It's failing to make sure that we have clean, potable, sufficient water for the existing population and certainly for future generations and living species. And so we really need to reactivate a relationship to the water that is quite different. You can see from this map that it's a multi-jurisdictional area. Canada, the U.S., 8 states, 2 provinces, and 134 tribes have land and water rights around the Great Lakes. And in that fragmentation, that jurisdictional fragmentation, there's no capacity to treat it as a whole ecological system. And for the most part, citizens are fairly disengaged and disempowered in the decisions that affect their water and the future of their water. So this project is looking at how can we activate a citizen movement that has an articulated claim that this water is all of ours, it belongs to all of us, and we have a shared responsibility and a rightful role in its governance. And so looking at, it's probably a decade-long project to awaken a sense of water citizenship through organizing and cultural strategies that can reconnect people to the water and the threats that it's facing. One of the tools we're using is the development of a new social charter, which will use both in actual encounters and virtual engagement with communities around the lakes to define a new set of principles and framework for the care and governance of the lakes and power for communities in being part of that. And we'll seek the recognition of that social charter in legal, political, and cultural arenas. So legally looking at public trust law, treaty law, other forms of law, emergent law like the rights of Mother Nature, Mother Earth, and political strategies for gaining the recognition of the commons as a collective claim that has meaning in a variety of different water decision-making questions. And then culturally, just how do people hold that and step into that sense of belonging. We'll be looking at a variety of catalytic leaders around the lakes, both academic and activist, legal and tribal, that can bring forward that framework, that commons framework in their communities and their arenas of influence and make the claim of the commons flourish in a variety of different ways. And because we see that this needs to be not just an activist-driven agenda, but really one that gives a multi-sector approach. You know, that everything from the activists to the business community to native and non-native, urban and rural communities need to be in the leadership. And so that in the end, we hope we can establish a legal, political, and cultural reality, which we call the Great Lakes Commons, that has the capacity to turn back the dispossession of our water and to give us the kind of democratically controlled resource decision-making that we know is necessary to protect the lakes. And you can find out more on our website at onthecommons.org in the Great Lakes Commons and water collections on that site. Thank you so much for this time.